First thing I just want to say is I recognize that I am indeed a guest in your house, and it's with an awareness that I step into your house and hope to provide something of value. You know, like the last speaker, I too want you to have a long career and live a long life after your career, after your retirement. And I spent the last 10 years of my professional life, a little more than that actually, researching this whole idea of surviving our careers. And I think it's a misguided idea. I think that we too often think about survival, and we don't really think about thriving. And that's really the tone of my conversation. So a little bit about me. I am a police lieutenant out in Hillsboro. I'm also a retired Coast Guard commander in the Reserve. I spent 27 years in the Coast Guard, active and reserve, and primarily working in the search and rescue community, and law enforcement community. And as a result of my research on resiliency, I found myself appointed as a part-time faculty member at Pacific University in their Graduate School of Professional Psychology. And I don't have a degree in psychology. I have, I think, a practice in psychology. So one of the things that's really, really important for me to say is that I'm going to share some things with you, and I'm going to walk us to the point of discomfort talking about some things, and I think it's in discomfort, it's on the edge of our comfort, that we really actually can grow and learn some things. So it's okay if you disagree with me. I certainly often don't believe everything I think either, and I think that's an important thing for being a resilient trainer and a resilient professional in public safety, is recognizing sometimes that our ideas have to evolve and they have to change. And really, that's kind of another theme of my talk, is the evolution of our ideas. So I take the approach of being descriptive when it comes to resiliency and when it comes to ethos, and not prescriptive. So in other words, I learned that it's not okay for me to tell you what you should do. You know, because who the hell am I to tell any of you what you should do? So I don't like to use should statements or need statements. In other words, you need to do this. I don't get prescriptive. I like to be descriptive and just generally show, hey, here's some things for us to consider, and maybe there's some ways you can translate that to your own life. Yeah, I'm a cop, and thank you for allowing me to be here. Talking about public safety, there's a lot we have in common. We have operational stressors in common. We have organizational stressors in common. And what's interesting is the fun tone between the bantering between what we would consider operators and the command, the chiefs. And I guess they're all in the back of the room. I don't know. So we kind of have the same thing, and there's studies in public safety that suggest that we're actually more stressed inside, the stations and the precincts and the firehouses than we are maybe out in the field. And the operational stressors, perhaps, yeah, they're stressful. We deal with some pretty traumatic and stressful operational issues, but sometimes the administrations create so much more stress for us. And so that's another thing just for us to consider and to think about. There's this notion in academia of a high reliability organization, and I'm quite certain that most of you have been exposed to what an HRO is. And I like to define a high reliability organization in context of resiliency as an agency or an organization that operates in a landscape of high stress, high stakes, high uncertainty, and in the case of public safety, in the case of the work you all do, high suffering. And those four ingredients create an operational and administrative environment that is, it's where y'all live, it's where y'all work, and it can be very, very challenging. And I think that using the model of a high reliability organization is very helpful for us because we look at elite performance. It doesn't surprise me that a former professional athlete becomes a firefighter. I view all of you as elite athletes. You work in a high performance organization, and you are required to sort of self-actualize in the moments of those acute stress operational times to be an elite performer. So physically, cognitively, and I would argue emotionally, and we can talk a little bit about emotions here shortly. So yes, I borrowed this slide, but here's the dark shadow of our profession, okay? We don't want to talk about suicide. We don't want to talk about our struggles with managing the stressors of the job. And there are many stressors in this job. We have, on one extreme, we have suicide of our brothers and sisters. On the continuum towards that, we have all kinds of maladaptive coping behaviors that ruin our lives. I mean, absolutely destructively ruin our lives. And I think that we really need to work to illuminate the dark shadows of this side of the work that we do. And I want to talk a little bit about some science here shortly that can help us do that. We are all on a human journey, and I think that's one thing we have in common. I read a study yesterday that was done in 2011 that talks about vicarious trauma. And we're all familiar with vicarious trauma, right? Because as firefighters, you all experience that. Well, this study looked at firefighter wives. And the conclusion of the study was that there's empirical evidence to suggest that you take your trauma home and it impacts your spouses, your partners, in a measurable scientific way. And I'll say that differently. We bring our trauma home and it affects our families in a measurable way. That's intuitively we know this, right? But it's amazing when researchers reinforce our intuition and force us to sort of reckon with what we know. I bring that up because there's so many things that we can do to work towards mitigating that trauma and shift our relationship with that trauma so that we work towards resiliency. We're all familiar with Maslow's hierarchy. Maslow had some other cool things to say too. And I won't read that to you. What I really want to talk to you about is mindset. And we've had some speakers up here talk about intuition, vision, and some pretty amazing things, really about how I'm synchronizing all of the features of this remarkable human machine we've been gifted with, the mental agility, the physical agility, and the emotional agility. We have this idea in public safety that emotions are optional. And so our maladaptive coping with emotion often culturally makes us think that we can control emotion. It makes us think that we can suppress emotion or turn it off and on. And what I'm here to tell you is that the last decade in research in neuroscience, neurobiology, and social psychology tells us that emotions are not optional. And the cool thing is this, is that no longer do we have to believe the culture, the lie our cultures tell us that emotions are weakness. Emotions are neuroscience. Emotions originate in this central portion of our brain called the amygdala. And that's the same place, incidentally, where our intuition originates, okay? So now it gets sort of fuzzy, no pun intended. Our emotion originates in our amygdala, and it's a natural neurological path of where it goes and how it impacts us. And what I'm here to tell you today is to talk about how we can train to regulate, not control, and it's not simply a nuance of different words, to regulate emotion, to regulate the awareness of what's occurring in this body of ours so that we can maximize our performance in the short run, that we can maximize our well-being in the long run. And weaving all of that into an ethos, what I like to refer to as a warrior ethos. Because every single one of you in the work that you do heroes' work. Absolutely do heroes' work. And there's a place to cultivate a warrior ethos that can help you be healthy, not simply survive, but can help you mitigate all of the things that you manage, that you face, the intense human suffering that you deal with every single watch. And even among your brothers and sisters in the service, right? Because eventually that suffering starts to become our own if we can't manage it well. One of the central components of warrior tradition is compassion, which is interesting, right? We think, well, warriors are badass. Well, absolutely. Warriors are, in fact, badass. And I would submit to you that each and every one of you, as a warrior in the fire service, yeah, you're a badass. The question is, are you grounded? The question is part of that warriorship that you flesh out, does it contain awareness? Does it contain compassion? And those things lead to a greater capacity for skillful action and elite performance. And this is the point in the talk where we shift from more general talk about warrior ethos and stress and emotion to the science. Kelly McGonigal is a psychologist, professor at Stanford University who's done tremendous research on stress. She recently published a book called The Upside of Stress. She writes a lot and talks a lot about the biology of courage and joy. And we can, in fact, cultivate courage, we can cultivate compassion, and we can do it through cultivating self-awareness. But what we've learned about trauma over the last 13 or 14 years, primarily courtesy of our returning combat veterans and the global war on terrorism, tremendous amounts of research has been done on the impact of trauma in the brain and the body. And in the fire service and the police service, we are behind the curve in translating that science to practical, tangible ways of training and tangible ways of approaching our culture. So Kelly talks about transforming our relationship to stress. So I don't like to talk about stress reduction. That is a thing of the 90s. I like to talk about resiliency. Resiliency in all kinds of dimensions of our life. Fitness, nutrition, spiritual resiliency. I don't like to define that. Again, I don't want to be prescriptive, but rather descriptive. There's ways that we can shift our relationship to stress and shift how we respond to stress. And that really is, it's about age-old wisdom. And yeah, I'm the police officer up here on stage with firefighters talking about meditation. So here we are, okay? It's true, it's true. So what if I told you that we can cultivate intuition? What if I told you we could cultivate vision? Some of the things that our speakers had previously talked about. And what if I told you that if you could practice an exercise that would reduce the inflammation in your body, which would improve your odds of being well throughout the arc of your career? You face a lot of carcinogens. The last speaker talked about cancer, and clearly, I'm not a medical doctor, I'm not a medical professional. But what we do know is that inflammation is probably one of the first things that strikes us in public safety. We don't even know it's happening. Our bodies become inflamed, our whole system becomes inflamed because of the stress. And what follows that is a typical pattern of behavioral issues, maladaptive coping, whether it's alcohol or other kinds of maladaptive coping, and obesity. Obesity follows. And obesity is an interesting thing. We often think we can know visually what obesity looks like, but we really don't. obesity strikes us in ways that are rather surprising. And it's about inflammation. So mindfulness, let's talk about what mindfulness is and maybe less about what it can do for us. Mindfulness really is training the mind. It's being still. It's focusing on the breath. It's literally taking time to sit initially and to breathe. It's no mantras, we're not worshiping any Indian gods. We're not even saying any words. We're literally sitting still and learning how to focus on the breath, often in one particular part of our body, okay? And what happens is we're learning to manage the constant narrative of thoughts, the constant sensations, and often the constant stream of emotion that's rolling through our mind, right? Most of us don't slow down long enough because after a while in these professions that we're in, those narratives are really unpleasant, aren't they? It's memories, it's sensations, it's emotions that we don't necessarily know how to cope with. So we move forward, we move rapidly, and we don't slow down, and we don't connect with our experience of being human. So mindfulness, defined by Jon Kabat-Zinn, who's a medical professional from University of Massachusetts Medical School, he calls it the awareness that emerges through paying attention on purpose. Paying attention on purpose. I know this all sounds really just bizarre, right? And I get that. Non-judgmentally, in the present moment. So what we teach, police officers and firefighters, believe it or not, is to sit and to breathe and to focus on the breath. And it has a transformational impact over time. Absolutely transformational. And I can talk a little bit more about what that looks like. But this is what I know you're thinking, okay? And it's okay. Trust me, I've been doing this for a decade. I get it, because 15 years ago, if you told me I'd be talking to firefighters about meditation, I would literally would wonder what kind of dope you're on. But here I am, So I get it. I get the reservations. What I would propose to you is that a warrior ethos of cultivating awareness has to come from a place of stillness. When we cultivate strength through being aware of what we're experiencing in life, it has to come from a place of stillness in some capacity. Los Angeles Fire Department, training in yoga and meditation. Tualatin Valley Fire and Rescue, and I'm pretty sure it's TVFNR folks here, have begun training in mindfulness meditation. Miami-Dade Fire is teaming up with neuroscientist Amishi Jha at the University of Miami, who's done some amazing work with the Marine Corps, okay? Here's Arnold. I'm going to skip through this quickly because I want to get to this. Okay. The military is at the forefront of training the mind. Again, remember I talked about there's this lagging between police and fire. We don't quite catch up on the modern science. So there is a place of science and research within the military. So Liz Stanley and Amishi Jha in 2008 trained Marines in mindfulness and have some remarkable results. Some of the things they've learned was increased mental agility, improved emotion regulation, attention, situational awareness, improved sleep. Do those things sound like they're good ingredients in your performance in your work? Right? Simply by teaching some simple meditation. Again, no mantras, this isn't transcendental, not that there's anything wrong with that, but it's simply just sitting and breathing and focusing on what's happening in the body. It's a mystery magic. I don't understand it, but the science is amazing and what it does for us. Chris Johnson's a doctor, psychologist trained at UCLA. He actually now is the performance psychologist for the Pittsburgh Pirates. He trained Navy SEALs recently. Warrior ethos, I'm going to kind of speed up here because I don't want to run over time. Warrior ethos, grounded compassion, pragmatic wisdom, and skillful action. This is really about cultivating that ethos internally, not just externally. I'll skip that. We fear to go inward, and so the challenge that I present to you all is our inward journey is as important as our outward journey. One way to cultivate that inward journey with all of the fitness work, the nutrition work, and the professional training is to train inside, and that really starts here through meditation. So some of the things that I'm working on with regard to mindfulness and training first responders. There's a retreat in Bend in January. We're doing retreats in Northern California, in Washington, D.C., actually next year. Northern California, a 5-day retreat in the fall. And I realize you're totally ready to come meditate with me now, right? Probably not. But the point is, it's just an introduction of how powerful your mind is in the work that you do, and how powerful of an impact that training your mind to be fit helps you be resilient, to manage trauma, and to thrive through the arc of your career instead of struggling to survive in your career. So it's my short thank you. I'm going to skip to the next slide. I think Alani talked about reading. I have all kinds of resources if you're interested. You can visit my website at mindfulbadge.com. Lots of research on there, even the research that I've been participating in. One of the best books ever, though, I'm going to tell you right now, is the book Resilience by Eric Greitens. He's a former Navy SEAL. A fantastic book. Highly encourage you to read it. If you read one book in the next 6 months, read that one. So thank you very much.